Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. The other day I was looking over comments from my videos and someone had made the point that they thought my LVUI video talking about mouse overs was for macros rather than toolbars. I apologise for the confusion. So here we are, we're going to put the record straight right now. This is our starter guide to macros. Now I will say straight off the bat, this is probably going to be a long one, even when you're starting to look at macros within WoW. It's, yeah, a little bit crazy, so apologies if this is a particularly long one. I will do my best to make it as short as possible, and we will try and dive even deeper going forward in this series. So let's start off with what on earth is a macro within World of Warcraft. At its core, the macro is a way to perform more than one action at a time, or to modify how the action is performed. Back in vanilla, you could have fire and forget, crazy swifty one-shot macros doing all sorts of mad things. Nowadays, macros are a little bit more under control, but that's not to say they have been long abandoned. They are still an extremely powerful tool, allowing you to cancel auras like Ice Block, to doing mouse over interrupts, to a host of other things in between. And Blizzard are still adding more functions to this. In patch 6.0, Warlords of Draenor, we had new conditions were added, such as being able to test what talents you're currently running. In patch 7.1, Legion, we had the condition at cursor, which was added, which was huge. Now, before we go really crazy deep into the weeds on this, why don't we take a quick look at where exactly our macros are going to be stored once we've started to write them. Now, you can either hit enter and type /macro/m, or go to the main menu and you will see the option macro. Either way, these will take you to the repository for all of your macros. Now, it's worth noting that your macros are actually stored server-side. That means with Blizzard. So it doesn't matter what computer you jump on, where you go in the world, your macros will always be there ready for you to pull down. Also, you will see that there is the general tab, and then on this particular character, I have my Grimlock tab. The general tab is as you would expect. It is a shareable repository for all of your characters. Then you can have specific ones, like for me, Warlock, especially Demonology Warlock, I can put them all into Grimlock specific one, rather than overly cluttering, which as you can see has drastically failed, overly cluttering up my general tab. Now before we dive in and see what all of these various macros do, we need to understand how the macro is actually structured. What are the components that are required, that are needed to make it run, and what are the custom components that actually make it so good? Now every macro starts, like all commands in WoW, with a /. After this is the actual command. What are we going to execute? What is it we're going to do? Now this could be something as simple as, like with chat, /s/y, for say and yell, /I, all those various ones. Or we can go into more complex things like combat commands, like /cast. After that, then you have conditions. These are things that govern how the spell at the end is actually going to be executed. How is it going to work? When am I going to cast this? So for instance, a good example would be, if I don't have a pet, I want you to summon my pet. If I do have a pet, I don't want you to summon one. Something like that. But that condition changes drastically how the macro works, and that's what makes it so much better than a base spell. Now they are not in any way required, but as I say, they are the power behind the macro. And you can have multiple conditions within the brackets, each one separated by a comma. The way to think about it is, the comma is like an AND. Now once the conditions have been completed and you've closed the brackets, the last thing that remains is the final parameter, which is your spell. What is it that you actually want to achieve once you have hit this button? Now even though we've done our spell at the end, our final parameter, we're not finished if we don't want to be. We can use a semicolon here, and what that will do is say, actually I now want to also give you a different set of conditions, a different set of parameters, so that potentially I could, say, use a modifier. But rather than me gassing on, rather than me just keep spuriously talking, it's going to be easier if we actually bring up an example and we have a look at the following macro. You can see the / and you can see the command, which is cast. Next within the brackets is our condition, which is no modifier. Now we'll look at these in a little bit, but simply put it means that if I hold down Shift or Control or Alt, it's going to modify how the button reacts when it's pressed. Then here we've got the close of the conditions, and then our parameter or our spell that's being cast, what our end result is going to be, and that is to cast Harpoon. So simply put, all this part of the spell does is say, when I press the button, I just want you to cast Harpoon. That's it. You can see we have a semicolon. That means there's more to it. So now, within these new set of conditions, you can see that we now have the modifier shift. So if shift's being held, our target is going to be focus, and then, end of conditions, we're going to cast Harpoon. So all this macro is doing, as complex as it looks, is saying, if I press my button, let's say this is bound to F, I press F, then just do Harpoon as it normally would go. But if I'm holding down shift when I press F, I want you to, rather than go to my target, I want you to go to my focus. And that's it. But you can see there we have the flexibility to start changing how a basic spell like Harpoon works, and to make it more flexible and easier for us to use. Now we'll just say quickly here, when you start looking at macros online, which we all do countless times, you will often see at the beginning of a macro, #show tooltip. You'll even see it on a lot of mine when I show you guys later. This will show the tooltip for the spell being used within the macro. If you have multiple spells, which you can actually do, you can have several casts, or you can have a cast sequence, then what it will do is always show the first one within that sequence. That's not a problem. If you don't want that to happen, at the very end of this video you'll see my Fell Domination one, what you can actually do is you can put in #show tooltip again, but afterwards you put a space and then you just put the name of the spell and it will show the tooltip for that specific spell, rather than looking through and selecting what's best for itself. So we've looked at an overview of macros. What we're going to do now is we're going to dive in a little bit deeper and we're going to look at each part. We're going to look at the commands, we're going to look at the conditions, and then we're going to look at modifiers and things like that. So first up we have commands. Now this can range from, as I said before, the simple /S, meaning your character will just say something, whatever is put after that command. And this can be used in any of the chat channels. You can even do /Y and yell out that you are feeling funky. And this is actually good if you are a new player and you want to introduce yourself at the beginning of a dungeon. You can actually just create a macro, either /I, /S, whatever you want it to be, and just say, hi, I'm new to tanking, so let me know if I go the wrong way or I need to know some particular tactics. Cheers. And that's it. Just have that macro. You don't have to feel the pressure that I want to tell these guys I'm new, I want them to be informed, but I don't want. I'm writing all this out and they're like, let's go tank, Jesus, come on, which puts you under more pressure and more stress. Similarly, you can have things like /pull 10. You can have pull timers and stuff like that already set to your action bar. So when you're doing M+, and that Demon Hunter is there chumping in a bit going, you better give me a cooldown because I want to pop meta, you can do it without stressing, without worrying about, oh my god, what is the command for this? I don't want to type it in because people are screaming and say I'm a scrub lord. Instead, you can just have all of that set up on a toolbar at the side. Now also, a little bit of fun here, is you can also do /emote. And you can create your very own custom emote. So if you know, if you do /dance, you do /fart, or any such things, it will actually show as a slightly different colour, meaning it's an emote. If you do /emote as a macro, and then type something after it, that text afterwards will appear as the given emote. But on to the big ones, the combat commands. So the name combat command can actually be a little bit misleading, as these commands are not just specifically for combat. The way to look at them probably best is as a way to commence or cease an action. And there are a lot of these, ranging from something like cast sequence to cast random, that simply casts a random spell, all the way to cancel aura. But the main one that we're probably going to use the most, the main one we're going to focus on in this video, is going to be cast or use. So we should focus our attention on those two, or one. Yeah. As both actually do the same thing. It's purely personal taste whether you want to use cast or you want to use. I'm an awkward one, so personally I actually use cast for spells, and I use for things like trinkets and that, but you don't have to. So rather than get bogged down in all the commands, which we shall actually save for a deep dive later on, instead we are going to focus on simply using cast, understanding that, and the conditions and everything else that go around that. Now there are a lot of modifiers, there are a lot of things that can go into changing how your spell, your macro is going to work. First up we're going to look at, because we spoke about them before, key modifiers. Now there are three possible options here. There is shift, there is alt, and there is control. All that is basically saying is if you hold down shift or control or alt and press a button, it will do something different to if you just press it normally. They're the only ones you can have. An example here would be, as you can see on the screen, /cast, mod shift, @focus, or / banish. Again, sounds like some crazy Excel formula, but all that's saying is, I want to cast banish. If I hold down shift, I want you to cast it at the focus. If not, the / is just saying, just do it as default. Now we've seen @focus a couple of times here, so let's take a look at more target modifiers and how that's going to work. There are a decent number of these. I'll try and be as quick as possible. We have @player, which is obviously targeting the player. It's an interesting one because you may think, what on earth am I going to want that for? But you can do little tricks of it, like Angelic Feather. You can use that with an @player macro to just literally instantly drop Angelic Feather at your feet, no need to place it. Then we can start bringing in things like the key modifiers and shift. So we could have, if I hold down shift, I want to cast Angelic Feather at the player. But if I don't hold shift, then I want to place it down normally so that my party or my raid can use it. Very helpful. And you can see how these things can start building up. We have @target, which is simply your current target. Mouse over. This is a fantastic modifier and something we will dive very much into. But it basically allows you to cast spells at the mouse's location. Healing is so much fun with mouse over macros. An example of this would be something very simple like /cast at mouse over, comma exists, close bracket, then / renew. Never sounds very easy, doesn't roll off the tongue, these things. But all that's saying is, if there's a target that can be healed with renew, then I want you to use the mouse over. If not, just default and heal me. Thank you. Now next up we have @cursor, another really handy modifier, and as you had heard at the beginning, one that's only relatively recently been introduced. Now what this does is, you know all your spells that have a targeting reticle, they have the big circle that appears. You've got the Beelze bombers, you've got Blizzard, Flare, those kind of ones. Death and Decay is another good one. Those have the big circle that you need to get right, then drop. With the @cursor, it will always assume that wherever your cursor is, that's where you want to drop this. So all you need to do is press the button, press the ability, and that's where it will drop. It takes some getting used to. When I was first using this, ended up dropping stuff all over the place because my mouse would be somewhere where I didn't think it was. As I say, it does take some getting used to it. Once you do, it is a fantastic time saver. You no longer need to bring that circle up. You're not double clicking, it's just one click, done and dusted. @focus, we've seen a couple of times already, and as the name suggests, it's going to target your focus. So if you're new to WoW and don't actually know, you can set a player or a target as your focus. If you've got a raid boss you want to keep an eye on, or a boss in a dungeon, you can just right click on them and make them your focus. Same with a player, like say for instance you wanted to know what the tank was doing at all times. Potentially you might have some macros that are made that they're going to just be used normally, or if there is a big problem they're going to go on the focus, which in this case potentially could be your tank. Up next is targets. This targets whatever your target, funnily enough, is targeting. It's good for, say, things like intervene, where you can realise that a mob is going to go and hit a teammate. You target that mob and intervene onto their target. Or for something like penance, you could be targeting a friendly player, and you can actually say, hey, while I'm healing you, I'm actually going to also do some DPS to that target that you're currently targeting. Even I'm getting tongue twisted with that one. And next up, there are two very specific ones. There is @boss1 and arena1. Now, these can be numerous numbers. You can go 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it may be. Basically, what they're going to do is they're going to target the arena party member 1, arena party member 2, or boss 1, boss 2. Obviously, arena can only be used in arena, and the boss can only be used in dungeons and raids. Last of all, which for me is actually a big one, because I'm obviously a warlock, is @pet, which targets the player's pet. Handy for things like misdirect if you happen to be a hunter. So we are getting near the end, ladies and gentlemen, I promise here. The last part we're going to look at are the conditions themselves. Now these always mean true, just so you're aware. You can modify them by adding the prefix no in front of them. What this will actually do is change the effect, it will reverse it around. So for instance, harm equals true if the target for the cast is an enemy. But you might say, well, I don't want that. I want to cast it on somebody if they're not an enemy. Well, that's fine. You could put no harm and it would be false if the target for the cast is an enemy. But that will target things that can't necessarily receive the spell, or that you don't want to receive the spell. Yeah, it's easy to understand. So first up, let's get into these. We have combat, and that will obviously equal true if in combat. Harm, as we were just talking about, equals true if the target for the cast is an enemy. Whereas we were talking about before with no harm, what you can actually use instead is help, which equals true if you can aid the target with the cast. So you can actually use help with a heal rather than no harm. Dead equals as you would expect if the target is dead or not. Then we have exists. We saw this before. See this a couple of times. This is if true, there is a spell that the target can be cast upon. That's a big one. You'll see that used quite a lot. So next up we have pet. Pet, by the way, can also mean demon. You'll see this at the very end. I do show a warlock one that uses pet. Now this one seems a little strange because it means if pet, then true. It means the player doesn't currently have a pet. You would think it means that you have a pet, but nope, apparently it doesn't. Channeling, as you would expect. True if you are currently channeling a spell. Then we have some interesting ones. We have button : number. Now this checks which mouse was used to click on the spell. You can use it as an alternative to holding down shift control. You could hit left button, right button, or middle mouse button, which are your three options. So the next two are interesting because they allow you to make macros that change depending on your talent and spec. Are you playing as Demo or Affliction? Maybe Destruction. That may change what demon you wish to summon. You can use spec number, and that allows you to have one button that changes for each spec. You can use things like talents. So you can use talent row column. And what that will do is say, hey, you want to choose between, again, I'm going to pick the Warlock bias, you want Demonic Strength, or do you want the Bombers? And you might swap between them depending on what you're doing. Well, now you can just have one button that sits there for that particular row. Doesn't matter what talent you pick, that button is just going to change its function based on whatever that spell may be. Another interesting one that I don't use at all, and I'm intrigued to see where it would be. Potentially you could have a neck, I suppose, but it's equipment slot. This allows you to check if an item is equipped. I don't know if it can be done against custom IDs for an item. That would be an interesting one to have a look at. But last in this section is group. Now this returns if you are in a group or not, as you would guess. But it can be customized. It can be done as group party or group raid. So you could say, I want to announce that I'm a new tank, but I'd only want to do it if I'm in a group party, not to anyone else. I don't want to be stood in the middle of Dazara Law or Borales and suddenly go, hello everybody, I am a new tank! And finally, our last couple. These ones are fun ones in my opinion, or kind of useful for out and about in the world. We have indoors and outdoors are true, depending on if, funnily enough, you're indoors or outdoors. Using this one can be quite good. Let's say you are inside of a druid, you want to be cat form, you go outside, you want to be travel form. They'll actually have a macro later on that shows that as an example. Then we have flyable, which means you are flying. Mounted, are you mounted? And then last of all, are you swimming? Really good ones for checking against druid forms. Now as you can tell from these lists, macros can get very complicated and bloated, and even talking about the simplest of ones can get you lost and disappearing down a rabbit hole. Even the best of us need to go to the interwebs from time to time. And there are a ton of places to go check out. Icy Veins, Wowhead are but the tip. Go to MMO Champion, just look at Google, look at the forums. There are tons of places where people are just asking for help with a given macro just because they've got themselves so tied up. And people are really willing to help because somebody may find a fantastic macro. It just needs a little tweak and then it's going to help everybody. So I know I've been talking long enough, but I do feel like we should take kind of what we've maybe learned along the way and look at some macros that I use personally, and you can see how what we've talked about can be put into practice. I'm not saying any of these are amazing, I'm not saying there is not better online, but these are ones that I actually use and will give you guys an idea of sort of the power of macros. Now first up we have the new Fell Domination and the extended summon time for demons, which is very, very frustrating. So it makes sense to try and combine the two into one. But there is a danger here. If we spam that ability to summon our demons, we could potentially summon a demon and then stun it. That's not good. Or if we accidentally hit the button once, it stuns our demon for a couple of seconds. You can see on the screen here. So this is what I use. I only come up with it very recently because obviously Fell Domination's only been added to the game very recently. And that is #show tooltip and then cast no pet, no mod, Fell Domination, and then cast no pet, no mod, summon Wrathguard. Now what that'll do is pop Fell Domination and then summon my Wrathguard. The reason for no pet is as soon as that has been popped, you won't be able to use the button again because of the no pet, which means you will not stun the pet. Your pet will not suddenly summon to save your buns because something's trying to kill you, and then decide it needs a little bit of a nap. Now, the reason the no mod is in there was I was looking at whether it needed a shift modifier so that I could potentially hit a button and not use the Fell Domination. I haven't bothered with that, but that's entirely up to you. Something to be played about with. Now, next up is a very simple cancel macro for Burning Rush. Apologies, I know there's a Warlock bias, but this can be used for things like Ice Block and so on. Cast Burning Rush, which means I can run around like my buns are on fire. If I just do Burning Rush again, I just hit that button once again, it just cancels the aura. That's it. Nice and easy. We're going to start moving on to the healing ones now, especially onto my Druid. And that is Swap Action Bar 1-2. This is one we didn't even cover before, because I didn't want to try and overcomplicate things. I know, this video is already huge, and I've already complicated it. But here we go. Because I'm left-handed, I can't always use the Shift, Control, and Alt. I instead use my healing abilities on 1-12, which is for my Razor Naga. What I can do with swap action bars is I now have that on a button, bound to my down arrow. I hit my down arrow, it completely changes what abilities are available on my bar. But because the buttons themselves aren't changing, they're still bound to my mouse. It would still be the same if they were bound to your keyboard, that's fine. But it means that I basically have 24 abilities at my disposal on 12 buttons. It's incredibly helpful, especially with more buttons being added, with the fact that healers now, there is a level of expectation you're going to be doing DPS. Another one that's handy for druids, and that is show tooltip /dismount /use indoors capped form travel form. Now you don't necessarily need to dismount for this. I've got it. It's entirely up to you. Now, as you can see here, if I'm indoors, I'm going to be using cat form running around, but as soon as I'm outdoors, I'm going to use whatever the appropriate travel form is. Here, I can fly, so I'm going to go into my little owl mode. If I was in water, I'd go into my water mode, and so on and so forth. It's really simple, just super clean. You can see way more complicated ones that I'll actually add in, whether you then want to go into bear form, whether you want to go into boomkin, and all of that. I've just got something simple that just means I can move faster indoors. That's it. Now, before our final macro, I wanted to show two different macros for target circles. Spells like Death and Decay, Bilge-Ones, Blizzard, and so on, Flare even. One is for at the player, and the other is for at the cursor. So first up, we'll look at player. So we've got #show tooltip, which is going to tell us Death and Decay. And then we have /at player Death and Decay. All that is going to do, you can see it again on the screen here, is it will literally drop Death and Decay on me every time. So it basically makes my Death and Decay like Consecrate for Paladins. But that's not great if we're talking about Blizzard or Bilge Bombers, because I don't want to be getting punched in the face in the middle of all of that while I'm dropping Blizzard on myself all the time. No, not handy. Instead for that, what we're going to do is #show tooltip /cast at cursor Death and Decay. What this will do is it won't bring down the target reticle. You won't get the big green circle. Instead, it's going to say wherever your cursor is, that is the middle of that green circle, and I will drop it there. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it is very handy. Last, but by no means least, yes, we finally reached the end. And that is an actual healing mouse over macro. And people are crying now, going, this is all I wanted. I just wanted the healing macro. That was it. But yes, here it finally is. This is the one I use, and I kind of got it in Legion. I didn't create this, but it has been, I got it from the WoW forums. It has been a huge help. I've tweaked it a little bit. It could be cleaner. It could be more efficient, but it has never gone wrong on me. It has never let me down. So it's one of those where I'm just not going to touch it if it's not broken. So we've got the show tooltip. Then we've got use. You can use cast. You can use. It's entirely up to you. And then we've got at mouse over, help, not dead. Then we've got help, no dead. Then we've got at player, regrowth. All that's basically going to do is, if I hover over somebody, I can heal them. And if I don't have a target, it's going to heal me. It's exactly what I want. It's perfect. And that is me done, ladies and gentlemen. I know this has been a long one, and I apologise for that, but I wanted to try and be as thorough as I possibly could for the first one to try and lay the foundations. We're then going to go forward. We're going to look at different areas where these can help. We're going to look at healing, tanking. We're going to be looking at the different components again in slightly more detail, because obviously I've talked about things like cast sequence. I haven't really shown that on here. And we're going to be just diving in, slowly building up our knowledge. Hopefully trying to pull in some experts, because I'm no means an expert on this. There's a couple of guys in Discord I'm part of who are fantastic at macros. Hopefully I'll try and bring them in and they can really shine. But that'll be way down the road, because I think we all need to get our foundations a little better. But that is me done, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for bearing with me this long, and I will catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.